Our last speaker this evening is Dr. Poole, who, with a PhD in capitalism and theology, is hopefully very well placed to speak on this subject. She's worked for the Church Commissioners for England. She then changed careers and became a management consultant at Deloitte, and then latterly has taught leadership and ethics at Ashridge Business School, where she's currently an associate, which allows her to take time out to write books. She's also the first female chairman of the Governors of Gordonstoun School, and she has a wealth of hobbies and interests, and she also writes a blog called Eve's Commonplace. Despite of, and maybe because of, her wide variety of interests and careers, she comes across as a wonderfully down-to-earth person, enjoying life to the full in the very best sense. Please welcome Dr. Eve Poole.
Thank you. I too have some props. I thought I might, I suppose the best way to describe me is probably a corporate theologian. So I suppose a lot of my biography is about trying to integrate the two worlds of ambition and spirituality. So I thought I might tell you a little bit about what that's taught me so far and how we might journey forward from that place. So my first exhibit is a very special Mont Blanc stylus. I bought this in New Bond Street at the height of my career at Deloitte Consulting. And I want to tell you about that because I was seriously impressive. Armed with my theology degree and my career for the Church of England, I'd gone off to do an MBA, and I thought it might be quite fun to apply for consulting because that seemed to be what everyone wanted to do. And the careers lady at Edinburgh laughed and said, well, they won't take a theologian, will they? So much to my surprise, and indeed Edinburgh's, I got a job there. They were so delighted they gave me Student of the Year award because who knew a theologian from the Church of England could go and work for Deloitte in capital markets. So I trotted around sorting out Swiss banks and, various demergers in high tech in Silicon Valley and being fabulous, and being promoted every possible opportunity and being even more fabulous. And being a sort of young buck, I was very keen to sort of show that I was one of the kind of leading gang. So when all these partners were trotting around with their Mont Blanc fountain pens, I had a Palm Pilot, remember those heady days? And therefore I had a Mont Blanc stylus because I was so cool. And it was only after I'd procured said item and I was trotting around the office, making sure I flashed at every possible opportunity because it has this very Mont Blanc-y bit at the end, that I suddenly realised that it was a rather sad exhibit as a sort of evidence of my overweening ambition, and this as the measure of my success as a management consultant at Deloitte. But it is figural and interesting, because it was at that moment that I started noticing there was something a bit missing around all this rushing about being fabulous, which was that I had been so busy that I hadn't really been paying much attention to my spiritual life. And that took me on a long journey, setting up something called the Foundation for Workplace Spirituality and doing papers on spirituality and management and things like that, off to Cambridge to do a doctorate in capitalism and theology, as you've heard. And it was partly because I'd realised I had another ambition. I'd achieved all that Deloitte stuff, that was fabulous, and I had loads of money and pots of cash, and a husband by then I'd met on a training course very conveniently. And I decided what I wanted was some children, because that's what cool people do when they've triumphed in career terms. They start a family these days. And so, I got cracking, got the husband, and, got organised on the underwear front. And nothing happened, really. And I was quite cross about this, because I was quite ambitious. I was from a family of 4 children. I knew it was my duty to, as my father would say, outbreed the idiots, and get on with it. A bit like your postman, have a family. And it was interesting, because I was used to things happening fairly automatically for me. I just had to sort of show up and be fabulous, and there you go. And I just was not getting pregnant. And it was quite an interesting experience to go through, because it was the first time I'd actually wanted something and had a very clear ambition about it, and it wasn't in my gift. And it took me on a very long and interesting journey around a whole load of spiritual counselling and weeping in front of statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary and things like that. And it also took me into millinery. You might be interested to hear, because we've been talking about craft, because I was fed up with waiting and I found it very difficult to wait. So I had to take up something that was so absorbing, it required my whole body, a bit like the calligraphy that you talked about so beautifully. And I found my solace in millinery, so boy did I make a lot of hats. I got very ambitious about hat making and about stitching and about feathers and about glorious things like that. And eventually I got a bit more humble about the extent to which I could command God and everybody else to my will. And eventually, Exhibit 2 had my little twins, with a bit of help. Yay, go me. And it was very interesting to reflect on that journey and think, well, what was that really about? What was the universe trying to teach me about my dialing up ambition, success at my fingertips? And it taught me quite a lot about what the word vocation means. I think when we think about ambition and spirituality, often that word vocation creeps in, which is there something that you think your soul is called towards, that if you work to that end, would give you both ambition and spirituality? And it struck me that I am the sort of person who is so motivated by ends, I often forget about means. And rushing around being obsessed by outcomes and Mont Blanc styluses, and not just one baby, by the way, 2, at once, without a C-section. What do you miss if you're so focused on outcomes and endpoints that you forget to pay attention to what's going on throughout the journey? And it made me notice that seeking meaningful work and being ambitious for goals needs also to be reflected in how you work. So not just the teleology, the end of the work, the vocational output, but the everyday craft of working. And then that made me reflect on the themes I heard emerging in my work at Ashridge Business School, largely in small, quiet rooms with very senior people being coached at the end of quite a stressful programme, where, to be honest, and I don't think it was just me, by the way, the most common reaction seemed to be that they would weep, because nobody really listened to them, nobody really cared. Often they had pretty awful jobs that made them quite unhappy. But they'd got on the treadmill, they had school fees to pay, they had the 7th wife who also had needs, and it was difficult for them to figure out how they could kind of row back from where they'd got to. And I started worrying about how we help people avoid getting trapped in these kinds of ambitious eddies that the world seems to be trying to surface us all towards. And that took me to my third exhibit, which is, I talk about handbags a lot at Gordonstoun because I'm the first female chairman, so it's very important to fly the flag for girl power. This is a Gordonstoun evening bag. You might recognise the tartan, those of you who know such things. And it's because it struck me that we're starting too late on with this. It's late on in the day, actually, today, but it's late on in the day for a lot of us here. It's really at school we need to be talking to people about ambition and spirituality. And I know a lot of you here are absolutely involved in education at that level. So I got involved in Gordonstoun because Gordonstoun is one of those schools that takes the development of character terribly seriously. And I know a lot of you here work with mindfulness and meditation with children in order to try and address mental health issues and anxiety that is besetting so many of our youngsters these days. And there's something really important about how we develop character early enough that we're able to stand up and be defiant if ambitions around us aren't actually where our spirit wants us to go. Because it's quite something to just turn your back on the glory because everybody else is rooting for you and egging you on. And I think this is one of the really fascinating things when you start looking into theological writings on vocation and on work. And often you just hear quoted back to you, you cannot serve two masters. and it's God or mammon. Or I think in career terms they say, it's the K or the Ks, don't they? Do you want a knighthood or do you want a load of loot? And I think for me there's something really quite instructive about that, about how we look at yearning and how we look at what we yearn for. Thomas Traherne, who was a forgotten mystic, I think, he was rediscovered quite late on, but was one of the metaphysical poets, writes a lot about this. He thinks that we'll never be happy until we're clothed with the heavens. And he sees this restlessness about being a journey back to God. And Rowan Williams has also written a lot about this. When he talks about consumerism, he doesn't necessarily see it as wholly negative. He sees it as misdirected. He sees that what happens with advertising is that there's a technology of desire being created, which is to try and tempt us forward to things that we feel are legitimate goals for us. And it does that beautifully. Consumerism is an incredible machine because there's always more that we can buy and more that we can become and more that we can achieve. And the trick is to remember that that is directional and it doesn't need to stop there because it can stop with God. And I think when you listen to people like Rowan Williams talking about ambition, he does ask us to keep stopping and checking, a bit like you've been hearing tonight, this sort of slightly jerky journey where you have to keep having moments on the hour every hour just to have a think about where am I in all of this? And am I managing to balance ambition and spirituality? Because I think sometimes they have different gods. And those gods can be Janus, there can be the same God with two faces. But we sometimes need to make an effort to bring them back into alignment in that way. And I know that's one of the things I'm still wrestling with, because I have twins to bring up. I'm involved in a school. I'm also involved in trying to help organisations figure out how we can improve capitalism. Because it's one thing to make us all perfect. They talk about taking the fish out of the fishbowl and giving them a good polish, but then putting them back into the dirty water. It doesn't matter how brilliant we all are individually if we're living in a society which is polluted. So there's something really important about how do we keep thinking, what is our level of ambition for creation? What's our level of ambition for the society we live in economically? And how can we keep going from the macro to the micro, figuring out how many of our very small little actions around what we pay attention to, where we spend our money, can be multiplied up into something which is more of a vision of creation, something that we really are ambitious for, that we think is also truly spiritual. So those are my exhibits. A sad exhibit about my overweening ambition at Deloitte, a victorious but interesting ambition about being a mother, work in progress, and trying to think about character and how we develop character. So I think moving from outputs to inputs and also being really interested in process so that we're truly not just vocational about where we're trying to get to, but really vocational about noticing every step of the journey and making every step as beautiful as it could be. Thank you.